Hello and welcome to New Perspective አዲስቅኝት Media Service.
Ladies and gentlemen, writers, we invented the idea of how to be an independent international organization 90 years ago. And I have to say, both with embarrassment and pride, that I think this is the first time in 90 years that an international president has come officially to Ethiopia. And I'm very excited to be here. I'll be here until the 10th of March. Not long enough, but about 2 weeks, so long enough to see many of you 2, 3, 4 times. So not just a passing through, but an opportunity to learn. I should add that, like many people, all my life, I have been reading about Ethiopia, reading about its history, its ancient history, its role, its religion, its intellectual life through thousands of years, mythologies and reality, and sometimes reading Ethiopian writers, sometimes reading Western writers. And so I come here having read a great deal and therefore totally ignorant, because I've only read, I haven't seen or been. And so this is an important opportunity.
Please like, comment and subscribe to our channel. If you choose
individualism is incredibly important. And one of the interesting things about Toronto in particular is I think people in this city have understood the idea of public engagement. In order not to use the army when the anti-democratic forces were going wild and burning down Parliament, in order not to order the military and the police to open fire, that wasn't weakness. That was sort of the strength of being calm and of being restrained and of not allowing yourself to be provoked.
The following conversation was made at the study of Dr. John Ralston Saul in downtown Toronto. This room was once owned by Canada's known Prime Minister Lester Pearson. This is Canada's former Prime Minister Lester Pearson. Let's move to our conversation with Dr. John Ralston Saul.
That engagement is the key.
I mean, you are the co-chair of the Institute of Canadian Citizenship, and it's been working, for a long time to
That's about 17 years or something we've had it, yeah.
So, I mean, how do you make the balance between the individual and the group? I mean, something that I'm learning after I came to Canada is this is a country where the individual and the group make harmony and try to make a balance. But back there, where I came from, in Ethiopia, the group right is taking over the individual, and the individual has no right even in the Constitution.
Right.
There is no individual in the Constitution.
Really?
No.
Really.
So that is a question of fairness.
Yes.
So do we live without the individual?
No. I mean, I think that the trick is to find a way to balance those two things. I mean, you said it perfectly. I mean, I think every country has various kinds of group rights. I mean, it might be language groups, it might be religious groups, it might be geographical. Some people live in the mountains and some people live in the plain. If you live in the mountains, you have a completely different life than the people who live in the plains. And, some people might live on the water. And some people live in the prairies. It's a completely different life. So those are sort of different groups. The religions are different groups. The political beliefs, which go from somewhere on the right to somewhere on the left, are different groups, and all of that has to balance. We have to learn how do we live with all of those differences? How do we put them side by side? And one of the ways we do that is, of course, that we also have individual rights, and those individual rights. If you don't have individual rights, you don't have citizens. Citizens are individuals. Now, they're not. This is not what often in the United States they consider to be individualism. I'm not saying everybody, but there's a whole movement in the United States that individualism is that I can do whatever I want, and I can have a gun and walk down the street. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. That's not individualism. That's selfishness. That means you don't believe in society, and the result is you get violence and dangerous disorder. But real individualism is first of all engaging yourself in your society, which may be just on your street. It might be just 4 or 5 houses, and you think, gosh, look, there's something wrong, and I don't know what it would be. I mean, holes in the street, or something has gone terribly wrong, and you work together. On your street, but maybe you work together at City Hall. I mean, there's no particular value in being at the top of an enormous group, a country or a province, or a town or a village, or just on your street. I think I do more things on my street than
other place,
than other places, because it's really important, and I'm sure you're finding the same thing in a sense, or in your area.
That's true.
So all of that individualism is incredibly important, and one of the interesting things about Toronto, in particular, is I think people in this city have understood the idea of public engagement, and there are a lot of public meetings. Sometimes too many, but there are a lot of public meetings, and you go to them and you look around the room and you think, oh, who are all these people? And some of them are rich, and some of them are poor, and some of them are new, and some of them are old, and they all think it's an important thing to be there. I know a lot of other countries, France, where I've lived a lot, people don't go to public meetings very much. They believe
that affects the relationship between the society and the citizen.
Yeah. Well, what it tends to mean is their idea of citizenship goes like this up to power. It's like a pyramid, as opposed to something which is a series of flat levels, where citizens kind of find themselves at meetings and or getting together and talking about something that's working, or what do we need to protect. And like right now, in the corner just over there, there's a move to build a skyscraper, which will ruin all the houses nearby, and it'll have a domino effect up that street, St. George. And so they came to my door yesterday, a group of the people, saying, are you supportive of us standing up against this? And I said, absolutely. I was at the meeting, and I will go. When should we go to City Hall? If you want me to speak, I'll speak. But do whatever you like to help. And that's engagement as a citizen.
That's right. You mentioned the good thing in Addis Ababa. They are building these old heritage buildings in the city, and the reason they are dismantling those buildings was they were built by the colonizers, what they call them, colonizers.
The Italians.
Not the Italians, the Ethiopians.
I see.
The new group.
Oh, right.
The ethno-nationalist groups believes that the former monarchs and are colonizers.
I see.
So they, by dismantling those heritage buildings, they are revenging the past.
Right.
So this is everywhere from top to bottom. So, so the citizen has no right. So they are not worrying. If they oppose, they will be sentenced or they will be sent to jail.
Yeah.
So nobody reacts. So they are destroying it.
Right.
So the Roman
and making money out of what they're going to build.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. And it brings me to the question about race. You mentioned race
right.
In our conversation. Do you think race and ethnicity will be a challenge and will bring another destruction to our world?
Well, everything bad is possible, you know. but you know, a lot of history has not been about race. A lot of history has been about religion, or political organizations. I mean, really, the Roman Empire wasn't about race, because the Romans, they ceased to be Romans from the city very early on, and it became this. And you know, before you knew it, the empire was being run by people who were actually racially mixed from all over the place, and a lot of them from North Africa. It's one of the reasons that the Roman Empire, it wasn't a democracy, but one of the reasons it lasted so long was because it was reasonably inclusive over a long period of time. It wasn't about race. And Europe, you know, it's sort of first rise to importance wasn't really about race. I mean, the real obsession with race comes quite late in the day and was frankly very destructive. I mean, very destructive. And still now, when I hear whenever I'm in Europe, I hear the remnants of the old race arguments, and you can see how destructive it is. Because people say things, and what it actually means is that they can't live with their fellow citizens.
Yeah.
They can't live in their democracy. They can't accept the legitimacy of their democracy. Not really, because they're sort of eliminating people based on color or something like that, right? Yeah. And you know, one of the things that I find very interesting in Toronto is you walk down the streets and you see the number of multiracial young couples. It's fantastic. It's fantastic.
It is.
I mean, the kids are going to school together, and they're not particularly interested in what color people are, what race is. In fact, maybe it's even the opposite, that they're it's more fun not to be with the same race. I don't know, you know. So I think something new for a Western country is coming out of it. Will come out of this city, and it's going to get more and more interesting. It may provoke a kind of racial backlash, but I think it can be held off. You know.
Interesting. I mean, in Ethiopia, for instance, the governing idea in place is ethnicity.
Right.
So ethnicity, you know, I don't know if we call it racism. People call it in Amharic ዘረኝነት, which means racism.
Oh,
so,
really?
yeah, you know, for instance, the one racial or one ethnic group is always against the other.
Right.
It could be economic reason, it could be political reason, it could be, you know, being a majority or a minority.
Yeah.
So it's a controlling issue. So it become a racial issue, like it's very contagious and it's very destructive. I mean, can we say this kind of relationship is a racial relationship?
Well, I think the other way of going at it, though, is to say that you know, each of us is more than one thing. So someone who wants to have a racial definition of society insists a lot that the only important thing is that you're, say in the old days in Canada, that you're a Northern Irish Protestant versus a French Canadian Catholic. You know, there was a big fight, right, in this country.
Yeah.
Well, of course, when you actually look at the history, what you discover is that, you know, because of the politics, they had to do a lot of things together, and so it turned out that they weren't just those two things. There were other things, like some of the Protestants and some of the Catholics agreed about more just social programming, and the other Catholics and Protestants disagreed. So that group was divided across that way. It was that way, and then it was that way, and then it was, more things were divided in all sorts of ways, because you realize that again, people live on a street, and they go out in the street, and they realize, well, there are all these people on the street, and they're all quite different. And now, some places in Toronto, there are groups who are quite similar because they're immigrant groups, and often they go where their uncle is or
they
whatever.
Belong, I don't think they belong with.
But often you find what happens within 2 generations is they go off in different places. Like what's it called? Spadina, and that whole area where there's a lot of good shopping and fun shopping and things. Yeah. That area has changed character in terms of races and religions and peoples. How many times in the last 100 years? And it just, it was originally built by lower middle class Anglo-Protestants, and then it was taken over by, and not all of them left, but it was more or less taken over by new Jewish immigrants, and it became a Jewish area. It had a big impact there. And then a lot of people came from Latin America, and it became a Latin America area. Now you've got 3 groups mixed together, and now it's become Caribbeans came into the area. Now there's 4 groups all mixed up together in that area, and now it's a really interesting area because it's this, because none of those groups left completely.
So some of them will stay there.
And the character of what they brought is there. Sometimes it's the architecture or the restaurants or the whatever.
I mean, this is a very important, process. It's evolution kind of process. But when people retreat and go backward and try to apply the primordial kind of
that's very dangerous.
Relationship, that's very dangerous.
Yeah, because there is no real primordial relationship. There is no primordial relationship. What does a primordial relationship among human beings mean? There's the family, but even the family is dangerous if it excludes people in the wrong ways. Like it suddenly says, oh yeah, but you can't be a friend of our family because you're living next door, but you're not like our family, so you can't. That's dangerous, right? But so even families really work best when their kids are going to go off to school, and I know the schools around here, and they're all very mixed up, which is great.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, before I move to the other question, Canada faced this same question, like you mentioned. There is a difference between the French and
Scottish mainly, Scottish and Irish.
Yeah. And
not many English. This is not a country where there are a lot of English. The English went to the States.
Okay, so I mean,
it's an interesting detail.
Yeah. But when Canada was re-established, or when you write the Constitution, the modern Constitution, when was that? 1980?
Oh, 82 you mean?
82.
Yeah, so it's really just a reworking of the original Constitution. So that, so I don't want to interrupt you, but I mean the agreement of 1848. They took a constitution which had been designed to divide the Anglophones and the Francophones. So it was a colonial constitution. So the LaFontaine and Baldwin and their reform movement won the election and then had to govern with this constitution. So they basically reinterpreted the constitution and made it a democratic constitution to the fury of the people who'd written it, right? And then, then there was sort of 20 years of democratic government, but confusion because the constitution was sort of a mess. So then they had confederation, and they added a few more provinces, and it became more complicated in another way. But they didn't evaporate all that happened before. They added on to it. And so in 82, basically, it wasn't the removal of anything. It was affirming this long line from 1848 and really making it absolutely clear about guaranteeing language rights and guaranteeing individual rights and guaranteeing group rights and trying to make sense of it in the Constitution. So it's as if Canada goes like...
it's a kind of amendment. I mean, the foundation was the
1848.
48
Yeah.
Constitution.
Well, it's not the Constitution of 48, it's the using of the Constitution in 48. So, I mean, it's like what's happened in Canada is you have the 1840-41 Constitution, which was not a very good one, and then the citizens and their democratic leaders go fuss, 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 mess, 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 and kind of rearrange it in an informal, messy way. And then they say, well, this is really a mess, but, maybe we should sort of clean it up a bit. So then you have 1867. And then they go mess, 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 fuss, 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 and then you have to clean it up again. And so you have these little moments, and each time what you're doing is you're cleaning up the day-to-day workings of the previous 20, 30 years and making it make sense.
Yeah, that's a very interesting evolution, and I mean, finally it brings the French Canada and the British,
back together again.
And but with the Constitution, I mean, this is a kind of comparative analysis of between the Ethiopian Constitution and this one. But that Constitution the preamble itself has no place for individual. And
which one?
The Ethiopian one.
Right.
And it divided the country along ethnic lines.
Yeah, well, let's see, that's not the way to do it.
That's not the way to do it. But the Canadian Constitution, the LaFontaine Baldwin philosophy approach is very important. That's why you were having this LaFontaine Baldwin lecture for.
Yeah, that's why I started talking about it. Yeah. They talked about always from 1848 on. People talked about the line from LaFontaine Baldwin on, and it was only in the 1970s when people sort of said, "No, we have a whole new thing," which wasn't true, and we're going to stop talking about that past, and that, in a way, confused people. So, in a way, what I did was I reattached the long history to all of this, and there are people like this Pearson, Lester Pearson, lived on this floor. When he was a young man, he was a young professor at University of Toronto, and when he got married to Marion, they rented this floor, and so they moved in here, and they lived here for quite a while. And then he went to Ottawa as one of the founders of the Foreign Affairs Department. So this room would have been the living room of Lester Pearson.
Wow.
And my office would have been their bedroom.
Wow, that's interesting.
And it's you can feel it in a funny way, and that's why I thought it was great to put part of the Canadian Library here.
Yeah.
And this is a photograph of Lester Pearson when he was Prime Minister, and that's a very wonderful singer called Stompin' Tom Connors, who's a country singer, but a really crazy country singer. He's dead now, but he never took his hat off. That's the only picture I know of him without his hat on.
The first time?
Yeah.
I mean,
he was quite young then, and that's a drawing of Pearson. As well.
Pearson, I think when Haile Selassie visited Canada in 1967 at the Expo.
Well, Pearson was Prime Minister.
Pearson was Prime Minister.
Yeah, and I met him once as a student.
Oh, did you?
Well, we would go to Ottawa from high school.
Yeah.
And so it must have been before I went to university. I must have been in high school, yeah. And if you're a member of Parliament, actually it was an old friend of my father's, but you're a member of Parliament. If you knew someone, still today, you call and then you go and see a member of Parliament, and maybe he'll take you to lunch in the parliamentary dining room and introduce you to the Prime Minister and things like that. And I remember he the first time I went, this guy took me down the hall where there were about four of us, and he said, "Come on, I'll see if I can find the Prime Minister." So he went down to the Prime Minister's office, and it was just before question period, and Pearson was just about to come out. And I always remembered, I can see it to this day, this guy with a big smile, and he was a very interesting looking fellow, coming out and shaking our hands. He didn't need to say anything. We were thrilled, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then he went back in his office, and they came down, and we sat in the galleries and watched him being attacked in question period, which is a lot of fun.
You are living in his room. That's
yeah.
And you were elected as a student prime minister at the University of Toronto?
No, at high school.
At high school.
The last year of high school, and I don't know if they have it anymore, but for a long time they had a model parliament, so that they would organize it that there would be 2 or 3 parties, probably 3 parties, and we would all vote in our schools. So whoever won, right? Yeah. And I can't remember what party I was. It was certainly either Liberal or Social Democrat. We won, and the year before I'd been the foreign minister, I think, and that year I was the prime minister. And we met in the legislature in the parliament here in Toronto, and debated passed motions and things like that. It was a lot of fun, you know.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And actually, the deputy prime minister was the son of Daniel Johnson, who was the Union Nationale premier of Quebec. But there were people who came from every sort of background. It was all public schools.
Yeah.
It wasn't private schools.
Have you ever think of being an elected official or being?
Yeah, I thought about it a lot, and you know, a lot, and I would have enjoyed it, I think. But when Adrian became Governor General, that's about the time when I might have run.
Yeah.
So it wasn't possible. You couldn't have your wife being Governor General and run for election. And so instead of that, I did the other kind of politics, which was run for president of PEN International. Yeah.
That's even.
Well, it's a big international organization, and freedom of expression is pretty important.
Yeah.
Put it mildly, you know. So I got my politics out of the blood. And it was
You're watching New Perspective አዲስቅኝት. New Perspective አዲስቅኝት is a digital print and broadcasting media outlet based in Toronto.
And it was complicated, you know that.
Very complicated. Very complicated.
Because there were, you know, not everybody in PEN really believes in freedom of expression, unfortunately. But there are a lot of wonderful people.
Yeah. I mean, how about the future?
I just, you know, really, PEN took 6 years, 7 days a week, and being at Rideau Hall was 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, 5, whatever, 7 days a week. And both of them traveling all the time, working day and night. It was exhausting. Yeah. And I really think I've done that. And I'm very, very happy writing. And I'm happy to have written this funny novel which involves animals and a young girl. And
the one is coming out.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about a novel for maybe 30 or 40 years, which was going to be, in my mind, the novel, you know, who knows. Anyway, I just the other night wrote a chapter for it. And strangely enough, it's one of the concluding chapters, so I have no idea why. But so I mean, I think I'm just very happy to be writing and doing things in public if there's an issue that is important, the way you do. I mean, you know, stand up and speak out, and encourage other people to speak out, and I think one of the most important thing is to help people understand that yes, it takes a lot of time to engage publicly, but the wrong thing to do is to say, well, I'll do that when I'm older and I've made some money. You have to do it when you're young and poor. That's what you start doing. And you get used to dividing up your time when you have no money. You know, and I was deeply in debt as a student, and, made my way. And, but in spite of having no money, you give up 25% of your time, whatever, to doing public activity. Then you get used to it. And you do it forever.
That's amazing. I mean, tell me about your family life. I mean, you married with Abraham Clarkson, and she is, one of our great governor generals.
Absolutely.
And she is a writer. She's a journalist.
Yeah, she was a journalist forever, a television journalist, but also an intellectual.
I saw the archive, and she was amazing.
Yeah.
And tell me about your relationship, and because you are partners as well.
Yeah, we don't talk much about it. We really don't. I mean, we met. We were introduced 40-something years ago by Kathy Graham. Do you know Bill Graham?
Yes.
Yeah, who's died unfortunately this year. In the last
The Secret of Happiness. That was the book I wrote. I read the first time about The Secret of Happiness. Billy Graham.
No, not him. No. Bill Graham. Here, that's him there.
Oh, that one. Okay, Bill Graham.
Who was foreign minister and defense minister.
Oh, yeah.
And there, I knew them, and Adrian knew them, and Kathy Graham introduced me to Adrian. And so we met a long time ago, and we've been together pretty well almost immediately ever since. And so, but we have very different, we have our institute together, but most of our lives we may agree on most things, but we do very different things. And, the way we do it, and, she's been a member of PEN, but she didn't do the kind of things I did in PEN. I've been a lot on television. I didn't do the kind of things she did in television. And I think one of the, she comes from a refugee family from Asia, who came as a child, and I come from a family that part of the family had come to Canada as refugees in the 18th century, fleeing the Americans. Because what they call the Loyalists. But the Loyalists were not grand people. Most of them were just people who were against the American Revolution, which was not democratic at the time. Remember, it was not a democratic movement.
Yeah.
The president was basically like a king, a Republican king, but he wasn't elected at first at all.
Yeah.
And neither was the Senate. The Senate was appointed by the states until the 20th century, really. And anyway, sorry, I'm off topic.
No, that affects your thinking and your philosophy and your way of worldview. I mean, your background, your...
Of course it does, as yours does. I mean, one of the interesting things about, for me, my background was that because my father was an army officer, so, in sort of 1940, what happened in Canada was that we went into the Second World War right away. Mm-hmm. And then within about a year, an enormous number of Canadians volunteered. We didn't have conscription until near the end of the war, and none of the people conscripted went overseas, or almost none. And so he, like all his friends, they basically volunteered. They left university in the second year, and they were all sent organized and sent over to Britain, waiting to fight. Yeah. And then he was sent off to fight in North Africa with the British, and then he landed on D-Day with the Canadians, with the Canadian forces, where we had a beach, and then all those years when he was in England, he met this young English woman and married her, and my oldest brother was born in England, in fact, before the end of the war. And so when he had to decide at the end of the war whether he should stay in the army or leave, and he stayed in. So I was brought up in 4 provinces, moving every 3 years, you know. And so I got used to that idea because it's a big country, and you know, we lived in Alberta, in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. And you know, so a lot of people think I'm from Ontario. I'm not. My family's from Manitoba, and I really am sort of from Manitoba and Alberta. And I love the foothills and I love the climate in Alberta. I love the kind of wildness of the foothills. I like riding. I've never taken a riding lesson in my life, but you know, because of life in Alberta, I sort of was put on horses, and I know how to hold on.
Still
I'll do it. Yeah, I like getting on a horse. I have no style. I just like it, and I've never been kicked off. But because I learned to ride on cowboy horses, you know, not fancy horses.
Did your dad own horse?
No. We had no money.
No.
We had no money. No. But you know, if you live in Alberta, there are ways you can go riding. I mean, people have horses. There are a lot of horses around. If you're interested, and I was always interested. So, you know, I've always loved that part of the country. And I'm always very happy when I'm there. We did the Lafayette Baldwin lecture there for the 2nd or 3rd time because I like going there a lot.
Are you doing it this time?
No, that was the last time. So I don't know where we're doing it next time. We haven't decided yet. We haven't quite decided where the next time will be. I mean, a lot of people would like us to do it in Vancouver, where we did it once, which would be great, or Victoria. Don't think we've done it there, but maybe we should do something in Quebec or in Halifax. You know, there's again the size of the country, right?
It's a big country. I mean, before we finish our conversation, what do you expect in the near future or in the
where
in the unforeseen future in the world? I mean, you know, the world is not the same after COVID-19 and after all this war and everything's happening around us.
You know, when I wrote Voltaire's Bastards, so it came out in the 90s, I started saying, because I realized you write a book like that and you think, well, what am I saying? What does this actually mean? I started thinking, well, what is going to happen? And it seemed to me that what we were headed towards was, unfortunately, a world where we would break up into regions. It was a return to, not like the kind of second half of the 19th century, you know, the empires, and that actually I think the American empire is sort of falling apart. It's not really they have money, but it's not really a very competent empire, you know, as empires go. That we were going to move back into a sort of almost pre-modern approach, which was groups, you know, and of course this could be to the disadvantage of Canada because it might leave us isolated with the United States, which would not be a good thing because they're slipping towards a civil war. In some ways they're already in it, and I think it's probably going to get worse. And so in a way, as a world broken up into sort of regional groups is bad for Canada. And if you look at Canadian foreign policy, if you look at what Pearson was doing and Trudeau was doing, all the prime ministers, they've always tried to create, they've always, in the creation of international groups, Canada is always in the front line. United Nations, NATO, you just go through them, you'll find always Canada's there, the NAFTA, Canada's always pushing these things. Why? Because we're stuck up here with one neighbor. So the only way to protect ourselves against the neighbor.
And do you think the immigration, the coming of
it's a big
from all that's an asset?
Of course it's an asset because it gives us, but the risk is the more we become original, the more frightened the Americans could become of us.
Oh yeah.
And I'll say something a bit strange. Never forget that the Americans have invaded virtually every country in the Americas in the 20th century, sometimes twice. They didn't, the last time they invaded Canada was 1814. And that's because we're very clever at playing our cards. And one of the cards we play is building these international relationships and these international groups. And, that's one of the reasons that Canada was very eager to build up a thing with the Caribbean. And actually we slightly blew it because there was a moment when a number of the former British colonies in the Caribbean wanted to join Canada. I don't know if you know this, but
No.
and we sort of discouraged it. We did it because we didn't.
They want to join it.
They wanted to join Canada
as a federation, as part of the.
as part of the federation.
That's
And I think that the reason that we kind of pushed it down was because of the anti-colonialism in the country, and people felt then we would be like an imperial power. Well, that wasn't what they were looking for. They were looking for a proper relationship, as provinces, if you like.
Yeah.
And in a way, it was a lost opportunity. It would have been complicated, but it was a lost opportunity in a way.
In this challenging time, it would be it's a way out.
It would have been a very interesting way out. So I think that one of the most important things for Canada today is we have to really, really put people, time, education, etc., into strengthening our relationships with the Caribbean and with Latin America and Central America. It's really, really important for us to do that as a primary thing.
How about Africa?
Yes, but yes.
It's a bit far, but
No, but I mean, but I'm saying that if we can do it properly, we've never done it properly with Latin America, which is crazy. But if we can do that properly, I think Africa. Put it another way, we have to move off the old reliance on Canada as a product of Europe and Britain. And build up this idea that we have very strong relationships with Latin America, with the Caribbean, with Africa, with Asia, and people have tried to do that. I mean, there was a big effort with Asia, which unfortunately has gone sort of wrong with China going bonkers. There have been some efforts with Africa. A lot with Francophone Africa because of Francophone Canada. There's a big Canadian involvement over the last half century in Francophone Africa. This was partly done when the French were interfering in Canada, in Quebec. So we interfered in Francophone Africa. And in Paris they got the message and backed off.
Interesting.
It was a very...
I think the relationship before Second World War, before Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, was, somehow influenced by French. Because the school system was French.
Right.
The first university was established with the help of the French Canadians.
Really?
Yes.
So it was Catholics?
It's Catholic, of course. The Jesuits.
Yes. So, I remember us talking about this. That's right. Yeah.
So that was the first high school, actually. The second high school named after Tafari Makonnen, which is Haile Selassie, before he became an emperor. So Tafari Makonnen was established by the French Canadians, and the school system was French. So they have good relationship.
Yeah, there were, it's interesting because, again, all these people who think that Canada started doing interesting things in the 1960s and 70s, actually, in the first half of the century, and even in the late 19th century, there was a real ambition, and some of it was through the religions, to do things elsewhere in the world. And one of the advantages of doing it through the religions was you didn't get involved with the politics of London and the politics of Paris. There's a way around that. Again, quite a clever, devious way of avoiding the Foreign Office and Quai d'Orsay,
Still, there was a relationship, but it's very interesting. Thank you very much for your time, our viewers and listeners. And we had a great conversation with John Ralston Saul. Thank you so much for taking your time and giving us this
Thank you so much.
valuable conversation.
Lovely chatting with you.
Okay, hopefully we'll do it sometimes again, and I wish you a very lovely summer break.
Well, let's hope it is a lovely summer. And not too many fires.
I hope.
All right.
Please like, comment and subscribe to our channel. If you choose to advertise your products or services, or if you like to sponsor our channel, write us at addisቅኝት@gmail.com or call us at 437-264-7575 or visit our website www.addisperspective.com.